Hello guys, and welcome back to another episode of Bareham Engines. I'm Lee, and remember to like, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Right, so first things first guys, we're going to head out into the workshop as promised in the last video, and we're going to crack on with stripping that COSWORTH engine. So let's go and find what Paul's found so far. Right, so as you can see, the cylinder head is off the COSWORTH and so is the sump. So Paul, well, any horrors so far?
No horrors yet, mate. It's all reasonably clean inside, actually.
We've got a G19 baffled sump kit, you can see there. Quite a nice bit of kit that, actually.
A bit of like an old style head gasket.
Oh yeah,
it?
That's the old Group A gasket, as they call it. So that's the fibre type as opposed to the multi-layer shim.
Victor Rhines.
Yeah.
The head doesn't look too bad, actually. There's no...
It doesn't actually, no. It looks pretty good in respect to...
There's no detonation as yet.
The waterways all look good. Usually they suffer with really bad corrosion around these areas.
We've had some pretty bad ones, haven't we? So.
We've had some real bad ones. The gasket is starting to blow here. What we tend to look at, a lot of people are obsessed with the head gaskets, but what we look at is this clean line here where the gasket, the fire ring sits, and where it goes round here and goes a bit dull. That is where it's beginning to blow, or if not already blown. So you can see it's starting to go up the top there. Combustion chambers don't look too bad for a COSWORTH. It looks a bit black, but that's just how they run, really. Yeah, so I think the next step with the cylinder head, Paul, we'll strip that, see what the guides are like, obviously measure the depth of the head, see how much has been took off in the past. We'll have that baffle out of there and see what crap's lying about. Obviously, they're a pretty good fit, these things, but they do hide sludge and crap behind there.
Yeah, that's fair.
So what we found in the underneath?
Nothing too bad. Obviously, apart from the block is dirty. I mean, that black is obviously just oil deposits over a long time.
That's right, yeah.
They're usually, when they clean, like a nice grey colour, aren't they? So
yeah,
that needs a very intensive clean.
What do the bores look like before we get it stripped?
Bores?
Because I'm pretty sure the customer said on here, I know I did it, oh Christ. That is an old school piston, that. Oh, I remember now, he said that these are about 6.5 to 1 compression.
That must be pretty bad off boost then.
Yeah, so
like 1.2
that is mega old school. I don't ever remember seeing pistons like that in them. But
it's had a belt slippage at some point because you've got some grooves, the valves in here.
That's it. That's pretty standard stuff, that. It doesn't look, it's got the old rings type in. That's why it's using the Group A gasket. Back in the day, they would mill a groove in there and put these rings in, but we will get rid of those.
There's a little bit of a shadow in there. That bore, I don't know if that's watermarks on that one.
Yeah, it does look a bit like watermarks, but I think first things first, we'll measure these bores once you've stripped it. Now, the customer did say, and it's not his fault because he doesn't even claim to be an engine builder, although he said he has built some engines. He did the usual. He said to me he wants liners in it, and I didn't say anything when he dropped it off, but he did say because you get the pistons at the top and you can rock them back and forth, and that is exactly, if you remember the video I did about a week or so back, going on about how pistons are not parallel, they're tapered up the top, so do not get them and rock them backwards and forwards. It tells you absolutely nothing. So whether that was the reason he thought we need liners, don't know, or whether it was to get rid of these rings, but we'll measure those, see what we got. He wants it 6 long studded, so we've got to do that anyway.
This must have been rebuilt a long time ago.
I think it has been, yeah. This here, I mean, they used to run them with the T4s, they'd run them down to like 7.2, but nothing like that. It must have been hell of a boost running through there.
That must have been horrendous for them.
And these days, it'd be absolutely horrendous to drive on the road.
When you come boost, that would have been like a rocket ship.
I was going to say, but before that, it'd be flat as a turd.
Like a 1.5 diesel, not a Peugeot ones. Right,
so we've got the COSWORTH down to a bare block now, and just starting from the bottom here, we've noticed straight away that there's a liner been put into number 2. So that looks about 1.5 mil thick, which is sort of borderline on whether it's going to be okay. But it's either a top hat liner that they've sort of put in a bit too long, because it's sitting about 1.5 mil, 2 mil proud down the bottom. If it's a straight liner, I would not have fitted it just straight in the block like that. I would have put a step into the block and push the liner down to the step down the bottom. But if it is proud like that and it's a straight liner, then when we turn this block over, you should see that that liner has slipped. So on first inspection, all the mains housings look okay. So looking at the top of the block, we've obviously got the wire rings in the block face, which is old school, what they used to do when they run the fibre gaskets. So this wire sort of protrudes, getting on 1/2 mil, and that would dig into the fibre gasket and just create more of a seal. But this number 2, that is obviously the straight liner, I am right, it's not a top hat, and as you can see, or you can definitely feel it, that liner has slipped. So that has slipped down probably about 1/2 mil. So that is going to blow a gasket instantly, and you can see on this edge here, it's definitely been blowing. So that is certainly going to create an issue. Number 1 here, I think this is the main problem. It's been blowing the gasket quite bad here. Obviously we've took the wire ring out, but you can see where they've cut that wire groove, it has just chipped a big bit out the top of the liner. So these are all at 1 mil anyway, which is obviously maximum for the COSWORTH size piston. So what we're going to do, I've ordered the ductile iron liners with the top hat flange, which will obviously, by the time we've cut the flange in, it will do away with these wire rings. We'll put those in and then we'll bore that back to standard. And I've ordered a standard set of Marler original pistons, which I'll put my own pockets in. So that will be the block sorted. Obviously we're going to do the 6 long stud conversion, ordered the studs, so that'll be that done. Right guys, it's thumbnail and title time, and it's all to do with the findings in this COSWORTH. It's to do with what we found on the crank and the bearings. Here we have a conrod, which we've obviously blasted up, and we have sized this one. This is a bearing. Now this was a bearing out of number 1 big end, and you can see that is down to the copper backing. Now, bearing in mind that this engine has not done much work at all. When it was built, we don't know, but it really hasn't done much work. That is number 1 bearing right down to the copper. Not only that, but if you put it in the housing, bear in mind these are meant to be a snug fit into either the rod or the cap. You see that there, look, that is a prick in a bucket and it is hammered out. Now the very strange thing is that these rods weren't honed before, it was the standard finish on the rod housings, but they looked perfect, all of them. It hasn't got to the point where it's damaged the crank because we've measured this, and this has been ground 0.25 on the mains and the big ends, and they measure perfect really. They're on bottom limit of the tolerance. You've got about 1/2 thou, 0.6 of a thou tolerance on the mains and the big ends, and this is on bottom limit, which is what we always try and give it anyway, because we like to run a bit of extra clearance on the COSIes. The reason for that is it's a wide journal, and we like to allow the oil to get out, otherwise the oil can heat up and create issues. Now, when you look at that bearing, you would think that either that is oil starvation or too much clearance, one or the other. But in fact, it's quite the opposite. And the reason for that is, although we're on bottom limit on the crankshaft, we measured these rods, and actually, here's us measuring a rod here. So if we just hold the conrod lightly in the aluminium jaws in this vise here, this is all torqued up to 45 foot-pounds. And now if we measure this conrod, so 0 is top limit, so that is at its what would be the slackest. So you've got 0.6 of a thou of tolerance on this size, and as you can see, we're a thou tight there, so that is probably 1/2 thou tighter than the bottom limit in one direction, and on the other direction you're sort of bit over bottom limit there, and there you're a thou tight. So this is probably one of the slacker conrods, but on the other conrods which Paul has sized, we're going down to 2.5. So that is about a thou and a half over or tighter than bottom limit. So as you can see there, those rods were about 1/2 thou tighter than bottom limit, up to about a thou and a half tight, and that is a standard set of rods untouched. So that's why I've said to you in previous videos that on a lot of stuff, especially these COSWORTH, I've never had a set of rods, whether they've been giving trouble or not, that measure what they should do. They're usually tight. So what we normally try and do is run the con rods on mid to top limit, the crank on bottom limit, and that gives us about 2.5 thou running clearance. It's just over a 2-inch journal on there, so 2.5 thou. You're on the slacker side of the correct side, but that is how we like to run these. That's how we find that they run right. So the moral of the story is, guys, the reason for this is it was too tight in areas. Not so much in that thrust area there, but along here it was very tight. And on this number 1 rod, we were about 1.5 thou tight from bottom limit, and it's probably just enough to either pinch the bearing or put extra heat into the bearing, or the oil can't escape quick enough. The oil heats up and just wears the bearing, and that is starting to hammer out. In not too long at all, that is going to have hammered the crank, knocked a big end out. You'll end up with a knocking noise, and it probably scrapped the crank. Bear in mind, these are about £1,000 to 1,500 quid now to buy second hand, plus a rod, so plus an engine build. So yeah, that's why I say, guys, it's absolute paramount importance. Whether they look okay and whether they've been giving trouble, we always size the rods and give them the correct clearance. So in the next video, we'll obviously be building this Mark III Focus RS. Now this is a different story again. We tend to run a tighter clearance on these, but I'll explain that in the next video. Moral of the story, guys, get all your rods checked and sized, no matter whether it's been given issues. Another thing with these, because we are still, although we were only running about 1/2 thou clearance on some of these rods, where it should be about 2 to 2.5, when you build it, you wouldn't notice that. It would still move, it would still turn, it would still feel okay, but under any sort of load, it's going to create trouble, and that's going to happen in the not too distant future. So yeah, bear that in mind, guys. But before we go any further, guys, you can see I've set the block up here, and I'm just boring it out for the liners. The liners have arrived now. They're the top hat ductile iron liners. But I have noticed something while I was editing this video, actually. If you look at the beginning of the video when we were going over the block and what we found, you notice this little section here wasn't chipped out at that time. Now, Paul said when he was pushing the pistons out from behind the block, he said this one seemed to be stuck. Now I suspect, looking at that cast iron there where the chunks come out, it's all black, so I suspect it's been chipped for some time, because where it's black you can see the gas has been blowing behind there, and when Paul's tried to push it out, the rings got caught on it and it's just pushed that chip out, because that was definitely still there when he stripped it and we first inspected it. So that's what I suspect's happened, but obviously putting these liners in is going to get rid of that anyway, guys. But the guy specifically wanted the ductile iron liners anyway, and this liner here in number 2 had slipped. So yeah, before you started commenting, I just thought I would point that out myself, because I didn't really notice that to start with. And guys, it doesn't end there. We have yet another issue with the COSWORTH engine. So here is the remainder of the liner that was in number 2 on this COSWORTH block. These here are the wire rings, which have obviously peeled out when we've done the flange for the other liner. So the way we get these liners out is we bore them out. So we keep boring, and you get to about 10 or 15 thou less than what the overall diameter is, and eventually this thing just peels out. And as you can see, that is where it was fitted in the existing bore. Now, the problem we have. So we order our liners from Westwood Cylinder Liners, and they do a top hat ductile iron flange liner, and this is the liner in question. Now, Westwood have had these made in the ductile iron. They used to do a normal cast iron one, but they don't do it anymore. Now, as many of you all know, if you've ever ordered liners from Westwood or anywhere else, they do a sheet with their sort of on-the-shelf liners. Nothing matches up to this, unfortunately. Now, the problem we've got here is because someone has fitted a liner, and I've said to you that it is slipped slightly, by the time this is peeled out, we have measured the housing in the block without removing any more material, and unfortunately, it measures about 4 thou over, or bigger, than the diameter of these liners. We obviously run about a 3 thou interference on these, so it's about 7 thou too big. Now that may be, it's very unlikely that this liner was about 4 thou bigger than this. This is a pretty standard metric diameter, to be honest with you. So my feeling is, one, that has either been bored slightly over, and what they've done is probably glued this in. They haven't got the correct interference, and that's why it's slipped. Or two, they've had this made, but I very much doubt they're going to have had a straight liner made. If you're going to get a liner made, you'd get one in top hat, surely. Anyway, that is a problem we've got, guys. It's not an issue. I've been in touch with Westwood, and we can get this liner made exactly the same as this, but I've asked them to do a 25 thou diameter bigger, so all the other dimensions are exactly the same, except this diameter here is 25 thou bigger. And then what I'll do is I've just bored out the block another 25 thou with the extra, obviously with the 3 thou interference. And we'll get this made. The only issue with that is it's a 5 to 6 week waiting list, so we're going to be set back on this one, guys. We can get the block bored, the other 3 liners in, and I can get it machined for long studs. I've got plenty to do. We obviously go through the cylinder head, get that one complete. I've got to put the pockets in the pistons yet. We've got to polish the crankshaft and get that assembly balanced. But yeah, we're going to be sort of set back a good 4 weeks on this job, guys. So unfortunately, I've let the customer know he's okay with that, but yeah, unfortunately, bit of a setback. Well, there we go, guys. Bit of a COSWORTH day today for all you COSWORTH fanatics, and an informative one, so I hope you've learnt something by today's video. That's it for today. We will see you Monday. Have a great weekend. Cheers, guys.